Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 34. We're going to be talking about Ouija, Origin of Evil, the movie from 2016. And just a heads up, our next episode, we're going to be talking about Facebook. I guess you don't really need a heads up. It's not like you got to go watch a movie or anything like that. But
you might want to watch The Social Network. Maybe
I'll
probably
Network.
Watch that. But it's not going to be about The Social Network. We're not really trying to look at it as a film, but we're really looking at Facebook as a horror and an anxiety-inducing, potentially apocalyptic force of evil.
I think you just summed up the episode I'm planning to participate in very, very well just then. Anything to plug?
Man, nothing has happened to me. I work in the dark gates of Silicon Valley, helping make things like Facebook happen. So no artistic pursuits at the moment.
You should plug this podcast, though. You're really good at that.
Yeah. Although we have given up on most of our social media because of despair and boredom with it, you should go over to iTunes, give us a 5-star rating if you haven't already. What it does, who knows? But we do like reading your comments. It is invigorating to hear some random person who loves horror say that we've done a good job or not. It's always interesting to hear from you fine folks.
Absolutely. And you should sign up for our newsletter. Go to scarythoughts.org. We have information about each episode, and you can sign up for our newsletter where that we send out with each episode and have recommendations and things like that for our listeners. Just a warning, spoiler alert to this podcast. We're going to be talking about Ouija, Origin of Evil. As if you've seen it, we're not doing a review. And we'll probably be talking about the movie Ouija from 2014, which is the one that came before it. They're of a piece. Okay. So, where do we want to start?
Well, I'll just say it outright. This is my least favorite of anything that we've watched for this podcast. I thought this movie was terrible.
Yeah.
Normally, I avoid the urge to simply just shit all over something, but it's going to be very difficult for me to do anything else other than that. I found almost nothing redeeming about this movie.
Although I think there's a lot in it to talk about.
Yes.
I mean, geez, don't you have a degree in rhetoric?
Yeah.
Aren't you supposed to be able to take all texts as equal and parse them out and dissect them semiotically?
Well, I can dissect and parse things out, but I do not believe in equality. So I definitely don't believe in equality of texts.
All right. Rather than get into it, let me just ask you, what's your favorite thing about this movie? We're not reviewing this movie, but let's start by reviewing it.
If there was anything I do like about it, I am fond of like 40s to 60s Americana. Like I love the design of the period. I love the clothing. And anytime a movie is done in any of those periods, I'm usually interested in it. And in Hollywood, and I guess by extension television, seems to have gotten the 60s really well lately. I don't know if there's just a bunch of shit laying around from Mad Men that people have their hands on in the stock rooms or whatever, but generally like movies that are set in periods like in the 60s look great now. The Shape of Water, for instance, that whole movie looked fantastic, all 60s. Even X-Men First Class I thought looked pretty cool. And so that's one thing. Even though it is a bit cheesy, I did like the little touches, like the cigarette burns that pop up frequently. And if you don't know what that is, they're on old film reels. There are these little marks in the top right corner of the film that would pop up. Most people know about them because of Fight Club, because it's a plot point in Fight Club about them. That would signal the projector to change reels because they had these giant projectors or whatever. That stuff I thought it's fun, but it's also pretty tired. Like after you've seen Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez's Grindhouse film, like that's it, man. Like they did it better than anybody else.
Yeah.
And no one else needs to do it.
Yeah. I mean, and if our listeners want to hear me bitch about retro movies, they can go back to our Stranger Things episode or House of the Devil, or especially The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2 episodes. I sort of wonder if, without spending too much time talking about the retromania aspects of this movie, I wonder if Hollywood and television has been especially adept at nailing that era because we've been hammering away at it for so long that now we're down to like, using the cigarette burns. How much more sort of obscure references, there were also techniques used in this film to sort of warp the image to sort of emulate cheaper film stock and this sort of older ways of approaching and shooting low budget horror film from that era. And that's interesting, but again, yes, we've been doing this for a long time, and how much more Stranger Things can you go? How much further can you take it from The Conjuring as a horror movie, for example? And I think it's diminishing returns at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it really just seems completely played out. But then again, what was more played out than a fucking rockabilly scene? You know what I mean? Like you had a point like 20 years ago or 15 years ago where entire groups of people would get together to cosplay the 50s. So is this any worse than that? I don't know. I mean, maybe.
As tired, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest disappointment of something leaning so heavily on that is Stranger Things is fun, interesting, has a lot of new stuff going on in it. Like the whole idea of the upside down is totally original. And I feel like the thing that made this movie so shitty is it had this setup that's pretty interesting. Like this family, this like kind of strong matriarchal mother who is basically running a scam out of her house and raising her children in it. All that stuff is potentially super, super interesting. And she's sort of like a real strong mother hen, and she's very protective of her daughters. And that's a character that, I think, in a better writer's hands or maybe a better director's hands, like that could have gone into a really interesting direction. Like weird mothers are always creepy and crazy, like Psycho, or the first Friday the 13th. There was something there that could have been very cool, and they just didn't pursue it. And it's like they spent all their time trying to make everything retro. Yeah. Instead.
Although I would turn what you're saying and say that they did invest time in making a creepy little girl, which I think is the strongest thing about the movie. I mean, I'll talk more about that later, but saying that's the strongest thing about this movie isn't necessarily saying a whole heck of a lot. But there it is. But one thing that does become possible when doing these retro movies, and what happens in this one, is that it references these moments of belief in history, setting something in the past so you can milk the satanic panic, for example, which is not something that everybody believed, but there was a lot of belief around. I don't know how many people genuinely believed Ouija boards worked, but enough that you can make a movie about it, and it's not too incredible to watch characters believe in it, because at the time people believed in it, especially children. I mean, I thought Ouija boards were real when I was 7 years old, or whenever the first time I encountered one was.
I loved Ouija boards when I was a little kid. My parents and like my family was fairly obsessed with the occult. Like they would go to like any weird patch of dirt in some backwoods snake handler territory. We would go check out if it was said to have magical properties or whatever. Like I'd been to mediums and seances and stuff when I was a little kid. Any haunted place you could possibly stop on the road to someplace that we would always go to. And so we had a Ouija board laying around, and my funniest Ouija board moment ever is I tried to get all the answers for a take-home test with it. So it was like a civics test. I must have been in like third grade or something like that. And I was like, like this is a real thing. So, Ouija boards are real. Like I'll just contact a ghost with a degree in this. And, did not fail, but did not get an A either.
So it was kind of so you probably connected with someone who just didn't know much about the subject, more about the subject than you.
Yeah. My subconscious knew slightly more about it than I did.
Yeah. But I think that a lot of horror movies use this mode, which is taking a belief system and then sort of exploding it. I mean, that's essentially what The Exorcist is. Yeah. I mean, if you're a heathen like me, any film that uses the reality of Catholicism, where there is good and evil and the devil and witches are actually evil, like those are all engaging with the same sort of mode of generating a plot, right? Is that there's a belief system and let's take it as truth and explode it.
Yeah. The funny thing about the Ouija board as a movie, as a property is, okay, not only is it a horror movie, not only is it a nostalgia movie, but it's also a board game movie. And there's a tradition of movies made about board, whether it be Clue or Jumanji, or I don't know. Is Jumanji an actual game before it was a movie, or is it a movie about a fake game?
I think it's a fake game.
Anyway, Clue as a good example, right?
Not a great example.
Not a great example, but there's also
Battleship.
There's video game movies like Super Mario Brothers or whatever, but it's not based on the rules of the game. It's based on the weird ideas that people had about the game.
Yeah.
So it's really more about, satanic panic ideas of a Ouija board than it is what the Ouija board was about. And it's interesting how in this film, there are different points where the game is stacked on top of other Parker Brothers properties. Mm-hmm. So, there's just a stack of board games like Monopoly, Life, and whatever, Chutes and Ladders. And I thought those scenes were kind of, one, is product placement, and probably there was some sort of, the toy company probably had some sort of clause that they had to show the other games or whatever, like just product placement. But it's weird, like knowing what I do about intellectual property, that Parker Brothers is essentially saying, we're acknowledging that there's this terrible occult history with this thing that we sell, which is kind of peculiar.
Yeah, but that's always been true of it, right? They've had it. It's now owned by Hasbro, but it as a property owned by a game manufacturer has been true for an awfully long time. They've always attached themselves to this extra property. And I honestly can't think of other examples of that, really. It seems that for the most part, board games are board games.
Right.
And that's the history of board games. And it is quite an outlier, at least as one of great popularity that has so much associated with it, so much meaning associated with it. Like we don't play the game of Life or Sorry or Chutes and Ladders and attach meaning to it. Mm-hmm. But Ouija is ostensibly it is a game, and again, this is like professional wrestling. It's, if you read the credits at the end, it's for entertainment purposes only,
right? But
how many 7-year-olds are watching it believing fully in the drama?
Probably quite a few.
Yeah.
The history of the actual board itself is, I think, probably worth bringing up now, which, there have been automatic writing boards for 1,000 years. Like, they originate in China. The planchette originates in China, which is the little thing that moves around on the board that you put your hands on. And all that stuff, it wasn't like a huge deal, though. Like, at one point, the Chinese government tries to outlaw it, and they do successfully for the most part. And then this board kind of emerges as a parlor game in the late 1890s or the early 1890s, but the late 1800s, as not a supernatural thing. It was just sort of a thing that it was a goof. But then it gets tied to all these people, really sadly, like trying to contact the ghosts of the Civil War dead. There was this like really painful rift in America where people wanted to contact these lost people. It's only like 30 years before, so you have these like kind of sad older people playing with this board. And then pretty soon it gets adopted by like Christian mediums, or the first people. This is one of the most interesting things to me, is that it goes from being this tool that Christian mediums use to becoming like a tool of the devil. And then it becomes evil. And then different Christian sects had different interactions with it. Like Catholics were just always no fucking way with the thing. It's like definitely the devil's tool.
Yeah. I want to get back to the movie specifically. I think one thing that differentiates the quote real Ouija board and the movie is that the movie has these rules like a game.
But does it?
Never play alone, never play in a graveyard, and always say goodbye.
Right. And none of those things, except for possibly never play alone, have any relevancy at all.
No, they all do.
I mean,
the little girl totally plays alone.
Right, but that's what I'm saying.
Nobody ever says goodbye. And the house is basically ostensibly built on a graveyard because there are all these bodies.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. Okay. It's actually, there are a few things that there was some forethought put into this movie, shockingly. But it is also interesting that this movie starts off with this woman scamming people, and her mother or parents, I forget, were psychics, right? And she just didn't have the gift. And that's so different from, we covered The Conjuring not that long ago. Mm-hmm. So this movie starts off with like a scammer, and it turns out to be real. Whereas The Conjuring, Ed and Lorraine Warren are
they're scammers.
Total scammers, but in the movie sets them up to be the real deal, and it just evolves from there. So they're sort of like on the same template, but they all have good intentions. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's one thing about the mother in this movie, is that she does it with good intentions. She's actually, I think the first scene we see her refuse money as her noble act, which connects her to Ed Warren for sure.
Yeah. She's not engaged in this when the husband is still alive, right?
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
I mean, what's very odd to me about making her into this fake medium is that being a fake medium, or being a medium, is all about cold reading. Whether you're a magician, like a street magician,
right,
or a medium or a psychic, regardless of the level at which you're operating, and whether you believe you have some sort of otherworldly power, or you're scamming people, or you're just a street magician, they all require cold reading. They all, which is a very fundamental and basic skill that anybody with some time and some perception can learn. And it's really just how to read people, how to get things out of them that they don't realize they're feeding you. And when you watch this movie, she's not good at it. You can see the chinks in the armor. She's got these special effects, and her daughters are helping her basically build a fun house ride at the carnival in her living room. But really, she's not a good cold reader. She's not very convincing. And it's either the fault of the movie, or it's clever that the movie is showing that she's just like alone and desperate and trying to keep up this house and feed 2 children.
Yeah.
Merely by trying to persuade people that she's something that she's not.
Yeah, I feel like that is a major failing for this movie, is not taking a real stance on her relationship to what she's doing. And it's probably asking too much of this movie, but other movies pull it off very well. So sometimes a psychic really believes in that they can communicate, and they have some sort of touch and ability. And those are sort of always the more dangerous people. The true believer is always more dangerous. But the other side of it is a character like the preacher in Steve Martin's Leap of Faith, right? A person who knows that he is a charlatan, has a very complex scam, and has all this machinery in place to conduct the scam. When faced with supernatural occurrences, there's a rift. Right? So in Leap of Faith, which is one of my favorite movies, and it's not a horror movie at all, but I totally recommend it to people. It's about a street preacher who travels around with a tent. He has a whole show, like a big old choir that sings with him, and he has these spies in the audience that sort of do his cold reading for him. So they get the information from people just in conversation, and they feed that information to him in an earpiece. And then he's able to do this like, and Jesus said, someone over here on the left side has arthritis, and if you put $10 in the bucket, you will be healed from your arthritis. And he says, is it you, ma'am? And we'll point to the lady. She's like, I have arthritis. Woo! Like that happens. And then in the movie, he is presented with an explicit miracle, a supernatural act. And his reaction in the film is really interesting. Like, he doesn't believe it. His first thought is this other person is also a scam artist. And you could see potential for that in this film where the little girl is doing it. And it would be interesting if the mother was like, oh, are you just a savant at reading people?
Yeah.
That would have been a much more interesting sort of, like, I could see this having been a really good but totally unwatched family drama about, like some sort of like 6 Feet Under sort of thing, that instead of being in a funeral home, it's a home of people who are like charlatan psychics. Would probably be so much more interesting than this mess of a supernatural garbage fest that happens in this movie. Because, the Ouija board has rules, but the actual supernatural creatures, what the fuck is going on? Who knows? Like,
it's total. So we seem to be in this era Okay, this is just sort of my thing about horror movies. So many horror movies in general, and this one in particular, is I find when I watch old giallo or like European horror movies of the 60s and 70s, like Jean Rollin and Jess Franco, they are almost entirely like, quote, bad movies, and not like kitschy B movies, which sometimes they are, but actually like incompetent filmmakers. I'll watch any of those films because generally speaking, there are a couple of moments that are kind of genius. And this might be blasphemy, but Suspiria is sort of the version of that because it is kind of a terrible movie, but there are so many amazing moments. It's like in, Shiver of the Vampire, there are like 5 visually gorgeous moments, but it's a terrible film. But it's worth watching for those moments. Suspiria is like almost entirely those good moments, but it's still kind of a janky film rife with incompetence. And I think that Blumhouse, as a studio, is churning out movies that are quite like that. Filmmaking has come a long way, and we've discussed many times about like, well, all movies look good now. It's just kind of a default. Like Hollywood is such this epic industry that everybody's tripping over their filmmaking degrees that at least films look good even if they don't have a good story. Right. And there are often really good actors reading these pretty bad screenplays. And Blumhouse seems to have latched onto something, which is they're pretty slick excuses for jump scares. And the plots are usually unbelievably kitchen sink. And so I sort of interrupted you. I think you were addressing this, which is like, okay, so it's a Ouija board, and in the house there was this Nazi doctor performing experiments, but you have to sew up the mouth to keep the screaming. Like, you can't follow the logic of the rules of engagement in Blumhouse films are often just so slapdash. That I imagine the director probably doesn't have a really cohesive vision for what the fuck's going on.
Yeah, and it's also just exacerbated by what I think is really sloppy filmmaking. I'd say the first half movie and the first 3/4 of the movie is a pretty slow burn horror. Not a lot happens. And I would say almost nothing scary happens in this movie. This is a completely unscary movie. And not just like I wasn't scared by it, but I can't even imagine my wife, who jumps at everything, being scared by this movie.
I think there were good jump scares. I actually think that some of the little girl moments were horrible cliches. Like stitching up the mouth is just like, that's been on the table for decades. The mouth that opens wider than humanly possible. We're now into the third decade. Yeah, we're in the third decade of that being like a scary horror movie thing. It's in all of them, and this movie does it 4 times.
Yeah. That's it. It uses the same scares over and over again. Like, how many times can you look through the thing and see a thing run in the shadows? It's lazy. And then you get 3/4 of the movie done, and then all of the exposition is just dumped in this 10-minute, super fast, slapdash nonsense. Like, what? And then the rest of the movie is just a mad rush to get it tied up to being a sequel, or a prequel. Or it's a prequel, but the last bit of the film, it kind of abandons anything that would be like original to make it fit with the other property. But the consequence of that, though, is I'm incorrect. It's not, original things do happen. Like a child is killed, which we've been talking about that being rare. It seems to only happen.
And there's no final girl.
Well, the older sister,
right? But she is cliche, ends up in a mental hospital.
Yeah,
just like so tired. But essentially, I mean, she's gone, and you see at the end she's still haunted. So she doesn't get away. She's like in an asylum, still followed by this demon.
Yeah. The other thing that's super stupid is, okay, I could see the big bad ghost being the Nazi doctor or whatever, but it's not. It's just one of his victims, and possibly multiple victims.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, well, why are they torturing this family? And they've been there the whole time. That's why they know the answers to when they're giving the reading to the mom, and the mom's like, I'm going to ask you basically something that only my dead husband would know. they know the answer because they were in the house at the same time.
Yeah.
So they were just totally uninvolved until the Ouija board came out. I mean, they have all these other tools of mediumship, and you'd think if the little girl had any sort of ability, it's like you were unlocked by this mass market board game. I mean,
that's so. Have you seen Witchboard? Well, of course you've seen Witchboard.
Yeah,
have you seen Witchboard in the last 20 years?
Oh man, no, it's probably been 20, 25 years.
So there's an expression from the movie Witchboard. It came out in 1986, but progressive entrapment, which is a super useful expression, which is so Witchboard. It's pretty much the same plot.
Is that when like a social justice warrior accuses you of something
and you can't get out of it,
no matter what?
Entrapment. And if you make excuses, you're guilty. And yeah. So Witchboard is pretty much the same plot. It's like there's a Ouija board, and then a demon gets you, and then it gets you. Like it's the same plot.
Yeah.
But the expert on the Ouija board refers to what's happening as progressive entrapment. You can't keep using the board because the more you use it, the deeper you get under this demon's power, and the more helpless you become. So,
also the plot of 976 Evil.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I haven't seen that in a long time. Well, I mean, it's the plot of. I mean, this is the thing.
Well, the progressive entrapment thing, like the more you engage with the thing that gives you the power.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Blumhouse films and the clumsiness kitchen sink, is that this is something we've referred to in the past as villainous trifling. Mm-hmm. You know, how do you sustain some sort of malevolence into 90 to 120 minutes of filmmaking? Because generally speaking, in reality, if you've got a lunatic, crazed killer unleashed at a slumber party, they're either going to kill everybody or they're going to kill one or two and then run away. Mm-hmm. But in a horror movie, it has to be prolonged somehow. So some have to get away, and there has to be incompetence, and then eventually one of the sorority girls has to trip and fall, and then she gets hers, meted out at a certain rate. And progressive entrapment allows that to happen because it's sort of an excuse to let a plot develop in a horror movie. It can't just be, oh, you unlocked it, now you're all fucked. The movie is essentially over. But it becomes really weird. One person can be just completely killed off, but then the other is almost killed off, but then gets away. And the limits of the power of the evil spirit, the demon, has these weird borders and thresholds that are incredibly idiosyncratic and hard to, when they're in the basement, why the demon just doesn't just take them all out. Instead of like one by one and then one gets away. Well, why did she get away and not this person? Why was the boy immediately just hung from the ceiling? But you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It sort of reminded me of, were you the one who turned me on to Nerd Writer, the YouTube channel? So he just did, and this sort of rolls into our Facebook conversation in the next episode, but something he refers to as dark patterns, which is the way websites and apps, etc., lure you in and are always sort of like shifting your focus so that he takes as an example, how to cancel your Amazon account. Mm. And you actually can't find any way of canceling your Amazon account. It's like 10 different steps, clicking on the most random links that have nothing to do with canceling your account. It's not under your account. It's not under help. The way that these things are designed, almost like progressive entrapment. Mm-hmm. They lure you in and you can't get out.
It reminds me,
and like with a Ouija board, it's like at first it's fun. It's just a game. It's super fun, and the more you use it, the worse your life becomes, and the more you're enmeshed in this evil creature. Anyway.
Yeah, I had a friend in high school who was a magician, and he also did tarot card readings in the French Quarter. And so he was kind of an interesting character because he was both a believer in the supernatural, but also very studied in the art of deception. So he both believed that he had Crowleyan thelemic power, but that his skill set in cold reading and cheating and all this other stuff was really functional for like the rubes. Basically, like high ceremonial magic for him, tricks for everyone else. Yeah. And he was really a believer in the actual supernatural capability of a Ouija board. And he had this really interesting thing to say about it, which is that the most evil things in life are always the most available. So why wouldn't a simple board game be where all this evil comes through? But here's the thing about it. Why? You know what I mean? Like, so, like, okay, if this is an evil device or whatever, because the film sort of has the idea that there's something about the Ouija board itself, because it's always shot very menacingly. I don't know if that's even the real cover, like what it looked like in the 60s, like with that weird ghosty. It looks like a member of Sun O.
Yeah,
on the cover.
That's on it.
Yeah, but so is the thing manufactured to be evil, or are the entities in the house taking advantage of it as a tool to the unconscious or something like that? Which brings the question back again: why not, when they're like holding their hand, saying knock twice for whatever, blow out this fucking candle? Like, why are these spirits not blowing out candles and shit the whole time? It just doesn't make any sense at all. And then, you know, why sew the mouth up? I don't even get it, because somewhere else in the movie somebody sewed up the doll's mouth, so that's
keep it from screaming and whispering.
I mean, the tape
ear.
doesn't work. You can't tape her mouth shut and get her to a doctor or an exorcist. The only time I've ever even heard of like sewing something's mouth shut as a vanquishment method is one of the older zombie methods of killing zombies was to pour salt in the zombie's mouth and then wire its mouth shut and it would die. But that's like voodoo zombies. That would be like, so I was always thinking about, like, could you imagine a Walking Dead if somebody was like, no, put down the gun, give me the needle thread and the bag of salt, you know? But yeah, I don't know, man. I even, like, we mentioned this before the podcast started. Like, even though I've seen this movie twice now, I had to go look the plot back up on Wikipedia. Like, when you said just now the boy dies from hanging, it's as if I had no memory of that.
Yeah, I don't want to completely dismiss this movie, but I really do have to concede that I watched it. And then I watched Ouija from 2014 just so that I had more of the story, more of the intertextuality of this world that they're creating available to me. And then the next day I realized I didn't know one from the other. And not because they were of the same world and were in the same house and all that, but because they were both so unremarkable. Neither of them left enough of an impression on me that I kind of couldn't remember either.
Yeah. And this fucking movie made $81 million.
And that's why I wanted to cover it. That's why I suggested it
to me.
Is that I figured it wouldn't be good, but I thought, like, well, there's something here because the cost to profit ratio is so impressive. There must be something worth talking about. And, you know, there is, but it seems to be slightly secondary to the skills of the filmmaker.
I mean, the closest movie I would even compare this to, and it is a very unfair comparison, is House of the Devil. Yep. Because, you know, House of the Devil has a fully retro vibe. There's a weird supernatural element. But there's just something more to House of the Devil. Even though I didn't love it, you have Tom Noonan's weird portrayal of the older man that is in the house.
There's nothing
so great.
Genuinely off around this movie. And that's something that I really gravitate towards horror movies for, is when I don't actually care about horror movies. What I'm drawn to is when a movie is really embodying something fucked up and you're getting a window into a very unique perspective on the world, which in horror movies tends to be very dark. So, you know, a really obvious example, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You see it, it's a really fucked up movie. You watch a documentary of it. Oh, what it took to get that movie was crazy and authentically disturbing to know about. The background of that movie is as disturbing as the movie itself. And I feel like this movie, for example, and, you know, it's an unfair comparison, but it's sort of the opposite of that. Like, yeah, this is just, you know, Lifetime Movie of the Week, but a little girl dies in it and it's about a Ouija board. Like, it's pretty seamless. Nothing's that weird. Again, I think there are some interesting jump scares and some decent choices. But to compare it to House of the Devil, the thing about House of the Devil and Stranger Things is I think that there is a deep reveling in what is weird about those eras. Mm-hmm. House of the Devil really extracts what a VHS copy of some backroom horror videotape contains. Stranger Things really, all its games around referentiality, as much as I'm not into that, it really goes the distance.
And it works,
it works.
You can tell that, not even just that it works, but in Stranger Things, it's much tighter.
Yes.
Like the things, they have impact, the editing is great, the music, even though it's a little heavy-handed and goofy at times, like it's edited well. It's a good-looking film. Like they just get the Stand By Me color pattern correctly. Right. And then House of the Devil is a great-looking movie.
Yes.
Like it does what some of the early Vincent Price movies do really well, particularly House on Haunted Hill, where the actual setting is menacing.
Yes.
Like the house is menacing.
Totally.
But there's nothing menacing about anything in Ouija.
Well, the thing that really sort of I couldn't help but become focused on is the costuming in Origin of Evil, which is everybody's got on authentically period clothing that those people would not be wearing. Everybody's clothing looks brand new, like someone just sewed it. And that is exactly the problem with this film. Like, yeah, you got the era right, but I'm not in that era. Mm-hmm. Those are all perfect articles of clothing from that year, but that doesn't mean you are bringing me into that year.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, yeah, the art director got it right, but didn't deliver.
Yeah.
And the cigarette burns in the film doesn't immerse us in that world. And again, that it doesn't revel in its era. It doesn't revel in horror. It doesn't revel in anything. It just sort of skirts along. It's not that scary. It's not that well written. It's all competent, but it just doesn't seem to be like deeply in any particular direction.
Yeah, it's funny how having the period correct clothing, even though it is very squeaky, and the appearance of the period correct film techniques together doesn't make something better.
It's just an Instagram filter, essentially.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Whereas, look at Rodriguez's Planet Terror, which is not set in the 70s, but has all the shit on top of it, and it's way more fun for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just because it's a bigger splatter movie, and it's designed to be funny, and it has these shocky, and maybe just because it's turned up so much, it's more Funhouse, and it's not... I don't know. Not lazy is not the word for it. It's just dissatisfying. Yeah, I think one of the things that Mad Men does so well is like the layering of things. Like, so you look at in the first season, the Draper's house. It's not all shit from 1961.
Right.
You have like
some shit's been laying around for 8 years.
Yeah, yeah. Rob Zombie does, I think, a pretty decent job of, his films are sort of 70s looking, but everybody looks weathered and worn in and beaten up. And in The Devil's Rejects, I think one of the more fun scenes is when the weird bluegrass band gets kidnapped at the hotel. Like, they look like they've been on the road for a while, and their van is all busted and shitty. And then when they get in the hotel room and there's the sort of like, it's not really quite a torture, I guess it's a torture scene. It feels like it could have taken place in that time. Like, and it's dirty and it's grimy. And it's just like a lot cooler than this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to go back to progressive entrapment and how a filmmaker draws out a film. I think another cliche that this film engages in, which I think is interesting, is, in previous episodes I've brought up that part of making a horror film take place pre-cell phone is you don't have to have the scene where someone is like, I can't get any bars. Mm-hmm. When you have some sort of a malevolent entity or a killer on the loose, how do you avoid the most simple solutions to the problem, and a mobile phone is the simplest solution to being chased by a crazed killer. So, but if you put it in 1960, if you put your movie in 1965, there are no cell phones and there aren't even landlines in the forest, right? But I sort of think that there's another layer in movies about haunting, about possession, that they have to avoid, which I sort of think has like the Get Out principle. Not the movie Get Out, although the movie Get Out parodies it, but the thing of like, get out of the house. It's haunted.
Right.
This movie even pays lip service to it because the mom at some point goes, so we move, we get her out of the house. And then the father says, the problem isn't the house, not anymore. And that is actually like used so much now that it is its own trope, that you think it's the house, but then it's not the house, it's actually the child. Or in, was it Insidious? It's not the house, it's the father now. Or, it gloms onto a person, so you can't just pull an Amityville and leave.
Right.
What else?
Catholicism is interesting in this film because a lot of times when a film has Catholicism as an element, it interacts with the theology of the religion. For instance, The Exorcist, a great example. In Catholicism, you can be possessed by a demon or a devil, and there are, like in the real world, there are procedures to deal with an exorcism. I'm not saying that there are spirits that possess. I'm just saying there's a procedure. There's like an almost bureaucracy to it, and usually, because it's so rare, even in the real world, like a priest will be like, I don't know. This seems kind of like maybe not real or whatever. Like that's kind of the tension in The Exorcist, is like the original priest is like, I don't know this. I don't think this is it. It's definitely some sort of like just mental disorder. And then he has to go into this sort of different level of the religion, like this darker level of the religion. And usually what's so fascinating about that is it's a more progressive element of the church recognizing a more archaic part of the church.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But here, the theology of Catholicism has no relevance at all. Like there's a priest.
It's helpless.
It's interesting. Like, okay, so
all he can really contribute is that he knows someone who's Polish.
Right. That's it. Like some nun who's actually more useful than he is. He's just like the character in Office Space. Like, I take the customer's information to the engineers. Like that's basically his role in this. It's absolutely useless. And one of the things I've always loved, I kind of have a real soft spot for Catholic horror, I guess you would call it, because what's sort of cool about it from a Catholic perspective is the moment something explicitly supernatural happens, it implies that your worldview is correct. And if your worldview is correct from the point of Catholicism, you are a bottle of holy water and a crucifix away from slaying demons. But that is not the case here.
Right.
You're just like, what is going on? And then you're not maybe you are dealing with demons, but you're dealing with unhappy spirits in this. But, it's like, what does having the little girl be possessed and turned into a thing that you have to burn in the original movie? Like, there's the whole thing about, like, how the girl's body has to be burned along with the Ouija board in order to stop it. Why? Like, why not just throw the Ouija board into a paper shredder? Why that? Why not just tear it to pieces?
No, why not defecate on it and then walk around it 3 times saying some passage from Leviticus? And it's just so random. And I know any supernatural horror, The Exorcist, any Catholic horror, like these things are random, even when they are based on some sort of like well-established religion, even when you invoke Catholicism to combat a demon. And there is a history and a structure in place for these things, ostensibly. Right. There's still a certain amount of randomness. There's still a certain amount of like, how are we going to exorcise Regan? Well, we have this, but will it work? And how quickly will the demon gain power relative to your ability to exorcise it? But I feel like there is a threshold past which it's just too much. It's hard to suspend the window of disbelief past a certain point with these things. When it's blown completely open, like let's say in Evil Dead and Ash versus Evil Dead, anything goes, and that's part of the fun of it. But I don't feel like the anything goesness in Origin of Evil contributes to its fun. I think it just makes it muddy and confusing and hard to follow.
Yeah, and then the anything ghostness of the Evil Dead series are that it's a totally different mythology. You know, they're not like devils and demons. They're maybe because of the existence of the Necronomicon, maybe Lovecraftian, but they're like the Deadites have an entirely different sort of mythos. But you know, when you talk about like Catholic horror, you're really engaging with the Western canon in literature because you know the devil of literature, whether it be Milton or Dante or whatever, that's the devil of horror movies, like this sexy, cool devil. And you know, then
wouldst thou like to live deliciously?
Exactly, like super cool. You know, that's the Rolling Stones devil. And when that isn't cool or doesn't make sense, I feel like it's always going to fall apart. Like that's the whole rule for horror movies, that the villain has to be fucking great in order for a horror movie to be good. Yeah. And the villain in this movie is just garbage. I mean, what is the villain? Is it the Nazi doctor? Is it the little girl? Is it some weird spirit? I mean, like, why is it a black tar-covered thing? Like what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I sort of wonder if all that confusion is Blumhouse's attempt to make this into a franchise. And not just like the Ouija franchise, which obviously they're doing, but I think that all studios are currently either directly engaged with or flirting with competing with the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the DC Cinematic Universe.
Yeah.
The success of building a world that you can just keep piling upon, and then you get people who are on board for anything. If you're into Daredevil, of course you'll watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and you'll watch any X-Men movie, and it's all just grist for the mill. I wonder if Blumhouse is attempting to create that sort of thing by making a complicated matrix of villainy.
I mean, do their films explicitly interact?
Shoot.
Like, is there a Blumhouse shared universe? I mean, that would be like moderately interesting.
Lynn Shay's in more than one, but I don't think she plays the same character.
But that's more like a Hammer horror sort of thing. Like you have a team and
yeah. But I wouldn't be surprised if in the coming few years, if there becomes Annabelle and the Warrens and the Ouija board and.
Yeah. But I would say the Warren movies, Conjuring, Conjuring 2, those are good movies, like on their own. Like I mean, if you look at the Conjuring and the Conjuring 2, I mean, I haven't seen any of the offshoots, like, you know, weird Jack in the Box guy that screams or whatever the other ones are, or, you know, Tail of the Doll's shoes or whatever stupid shit they make now. But I think Conjuring 1 and Conjuring 2 are very successful horror movies. The first one has great actors. Everybody in it's a great actor.
True.
The director moves the camera in really interesting ways.
That's true.
The house is a self-contained world, and like the geography of the film is really well done, and the color. I mean, there's just a lot to praise about those films.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have picked it as one of the most successful franchises of the last 10 years. I mean, it's made an ass load of money. I wonder if you'll see a backlash. Like, I don't know if you were that into comic books, but in the mid 90s or so, X-Men in particular, or Marvel in particular, everything was tied in. Like, so you could not just read an episode of X-Men. You sort of had to read New Mutants and X-Force and all the other shit that no one cared about. I wonder if we'll see a similar move where it became indie comics, like popped up right afterwards, you know?
Hopefully, but what I think is also funny is that it's sort of, okay, the tech industry learned nothing from the .com boost, has just as much blind hubris now, and that wasn't even that long ago. I think Marvel is destined for a similar thing. They didn't learn anything from the implosion of comic books by exactly what you're describing. I mean, it just ruined the comic book industry, and they're to blame.
I mean, it's the same thing, you know.
The Marvel Cinematic Universe is, I think, I mean, it's hard. It's like, it's going to happen, but then Jessica Jones season 2 is totally great. Daredevil season 2 is totally great. Thor Ragnarok is super funny.
Did you
so
finally
it's not
get to
happening
see it?
yet. Yeah.
It's funny. It's not as good as I was hoping it was going to be, because
I laughed a lot.
I did too. I mean, it's a pretty funny movie. And I love Taika Waititi. Is that his name?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I just like him. I think the dude that plays Thor is hilarious. Like, I think
Which I didn't see coming.
He has great comic timing.
Yeah.
I didn't see the shitty Ghostbusters reboot, but apparently he's really funny in
He's
that
really
too.
funny. That's right. He's really funny in it.
Yeah. And, you know, like the idea that, like, okay, we have a funny actor, we're going to let him be funny, I think is great, you know?
Yeah.
But, you know, like Neil Gaiman in his book of essays wrote about kind of what comic books did. And, you know, there was this moment where, you know, he went to this publisher convention and they're like, man, we are printing free money with these variant covers. You know, you remember it was kind of the beginning of like foil covers.
Yeah, holograms.
So you'd have like 5 different versions of the Todd McFarlane Spider-Man. And you're like, okay, this is, so what, I have to buy 5 of these now? Like, what is this? And then he said...
And they're all collector's editions. Like
right.
all
Every
5
single thing's
versions
collectible.
of even though there's a million copies of each of those 5.
And then, you know, and then Neil Gaiman was on some panel at this convention, and they were basically all patting themselves on the back about how great the industry was doing, because the sales, I don't think, have ever been as good as they were during that period. And Neil Gaiman's position was, story will always win in the end. You know, but I don't know that that's going to be true of movies because of the economics of movies. Because with comic books, you ended up with, you know, writer-creator imprints, you know, where basically like one dude wrote, drew, and did everything and could put it out on a small whatever. You can't really do that with movies.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or it's harder to do. And as much as we want to praise independent cinema and talk about how everybody's got a film studio in their iPhone, and we can argue about the YouTube revolution, it's just not the same.
It really isn't. I mean, I don't think, like, certainly if you're making things for the internet, I've never seen anything, no matter how clever, that was made like on an iPhone budget that would withstand a large screen. Like I've never seen anything. And if some viewer or listener
or be as epic and visceral, as something with Hollywood money behind it.
Yeah. I mean, it might have great ideas. It might be very interesting or something like that. But this gets into the Bret Easton Ellis critique of modern film versus television, is that, like, look, narrative is interesting in TV, but you just can't do on television what you could do with film, where you're making a mood, you're telling story through movement of camera. And I mean, everybody's like, oh, you know, film is going to be totally democratized. And that was Robert Rodriguez's book, Rebel Without a Crew. You know, that book seems so revolutionary. Like, oh, you can make this movie with like a video camera, but that's not real. You could make a hype reel which is kind of what happens now. Like, you know, I think all these tools that we have for YouTube or whatever, they allow you to make something clever enough to get you picked up by a studio. You know, and that's kind of what Robert Rodriguez's path was. He didn't make El Mariachi at first. He made a trailer for the movie that would be El Mariachi, and then when he got money.
Well, I think this has been floating around for a really long time. When videotape first became available in reel-to-reel that they were selling to the public, filmmakers were coming forward and saying that this is the end of film. Everybody is now a filmmaker. And that was shitty black and white tape on reel-to-reel. Mm-hmm. Your iPhone is a better camera than what Fassbinder had. But that doesn't make you Fassbinder. That doesn't make you and 3 of your buddies what Fassbinder had at his disposal.
Right.
The talent and the skill and the passion and the education that Fassbinder had at his disposal. And things can slip through. Things can happen. I mean, you know, if we're talking about horror, Blair Witch Project is an amazing example, but it's an outlier. And there have always been those outliers. But the fact that those outliers have been popping up for 50 years and this revolution that is imminent has never happened sort of proves the point. And
Right.
I think that a bloated, absurdly high-budgeted Hollywood movie is a grotesque thing. I mean, even Thor Ragnarok, or let's say the Fast and Furious movies, which I've seen all of them twice. Like, so my criticism doesn't hold too much weight here, but like, they're grotesque. There's a problem at the far side in the other direction as well, where everything is so test marketed to filth that it loses soul. But that doesn't mean that if you have enough soul and an iPhone, you have that much of a chance of making something that can compete with something with like a $15 million budget, let's say.
Yeah, it's sort of like the promise of punk rock, like Three Chords and the Truth.
Yeah.
Did not carry over to film at all.
Right.
But then again, you have like Herzog's entire back catalog of crazy fucking movies that are basically all great, which sort of leads me into my next point, which is I think these easy-to-use democratic technology platforms, there is something to raising the bar and having a hurdle to do it. You know what I mean? Like if you have to go steal film canisters, like I believe Herzog said to have done, or, you know, like get a friend who works at a film school and check out the cameras. There's just something interesting about like needing all that shit. Like you look at Ed Wood, right? The movie Ed Wood, all the crap that they had to go through to make that shitty movie. That's why that shitty movie is so enduring, is because even though it is terrible, it took heart to make it. Whereas now it doesn't really take heart to make anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of what does it take, if you, Chad, could make a movie based on a board game, what would it be?
I would probably make some sort of, does it have to be a horror movie?
Yeah.
Oh, if you make a horror movie based on, okay. I would probably have a version of Monopoly where the person winning the game was portrayed as this villainous Howard Hughes character and slowly performed all these schemes to completely destroy the other people around him. So it's sort of like a thriller where this person's greed drives them to completely ruin other people's lives and transform these neighborhoods into hotel centers. So, I mean, basically San Francisco.
That's great.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. What about you?
I have a bunch. Obviously, I've been thinking about this.
Right.
Mine, my first thought was like Monopoly, but the opposite. So the protagonist is the person who wins at Monopoly. And it's not like American Psycho. It's actually would somehow be a more existential horror film about the emptiness of going so far into unrestrained capitalism that when you crush the competition and have nothing left to fight against, when your whole life is about this manufactured market struggle and you dominate the market such that you win, that there is nothing left for you, and you turn inward. All your excess, the decadence sort of exposes the decay underneath. That's as far as I got with that one.
I'd love to make that much money. That'd be great.
No, well, you know what? I mean, I completely disagree because here's a thought experiment.
I would
right?
like to be hollowed out by riches.
No, here's the thing. Have I talked about this on this podcast before? Okay, there's the like, when I win the lottery, I sincerely believe that there is a level past which I don't want that money. I would love to win $1 million. I'd love to win $4 million. After about 20, I don't think I want that much money because then I can't hang out with any of my friends anymore. I am just another person. I would need security guards.
Only if you were famous.
But if you won the lottery above $20 million, people would know. Everyone would know. Where are you going to hang out? Everyone who knows you is going to want something from you. or you're going to think they want something from you. So then you can only hang out with other people that you know don't want something from you, which are other rich people. Mm-hmm. And who are they? And you didn't grow up with them. And then you have to be like, yeah, I still hang with my old friends, but it's weird because, like, what do you, like, buy them houses because they deserve it? And then they're beholden to you, and it completely shifts the dynamic of your relationship. We are way off topic.
Yeah, you're in like you'd be in like a real weird goth version of the show Entourage.
Holy shit. Okay, so another board game that I think would be great.
Well, before we move on from the board to your next board game, I would say an alternate that you probably haven't heard about is, okay, you do have people around you that only care about you being rich, but they're all hot.
I mean, having beautiful things or beautiful people around, at some point you become a nerd to it. If everything around you costs outrageous amounts of money, you don't attach meaning to it. And I think that, at least for me, this sounds horribly pretentious, but I'd rather live a life of meaning than a life of riches. You know, I'd rather have a personal attachment to the things I own than for them to be expensive looking. I'd rather have a life partner, a wife, who I adore and have grown up with than someone who just has big tits and does what she's told, right?
Maybe.
Oh my God, you're so disappointing.
How big are these tits?
Oh God. I'm so sorry I brought that up now. I'm going to have to edit out what I said so that I can edit out your response.
Well, I mean, like, I'm just being facetious. I do agree with you. But I think that there's probably no upper limit to, like, because I think what happens is the richer you get. I mean, this is way off topic. I think you just
Unfortunately, I'm sorry. This is the best part of this episode, I'm very sure.
But, I mean, the richer you get, you have the opportunity to play at different levels. Like, you know, we're fucking peasants, so we think about, like, oh, wouldn't it be right to always have your friends around? Like, is that cooler? Or is, like, being like Bill Gates, you're like, you know what? I think I might wipe out mosquitoes because fuck malaria. Like, that's like, I think you just get to those sorts of games that you play, or it just goes dark and you're like, you know what? Like, I like perfect 10s, but who are also amputees. Like, you get like these really specific, weird kinks that you could just walk out into absolute crazy land.
Yeah, and then you're crazy land. You're not creating. You don't have a fetish because of some core part of you and part of your development as a person. You've developed kinks because of excess.
Right.
You know, it's because you got to figure out how to fucking enjoy your bullshit amount of money.
Oh, yeah. I'm going through it right now, and I don't even make that much money. I make a lot of money for me now, you know, but it's really like middle, I mean, not that much. I'm like, oh, maybe I will buy that first edition of Blood Meridian one day, you know, but you don't really need it. Like that first edition of Blood Meridian, you can't read it any better than the paperback, although it's a lot cooler, you know. People come out of your house, you're like, check it out.
I think you haven't quite figured this out yet.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess what I'm coming down to it is I would rather be Caligula than a plumber.
No, you're so wrong. No.
What?
You want to be a plumber.
I don't know.
Plumbers are happier.
I'd rather
and that is a science fact.
Well, Mike Rowe says that. He says that, you know, he meets all these adjunct professors from East Coast to West Coast, and they're all terribly unhappy and riddled with debt. And then you have a plumber with a lake house and a margarita machine, happy as shit. I'd definitely rather be at this point a plumber than a copywriter.
Too late.
Yeah, it's way too late.
Speaking of plumbing, Professor Plum
in the kitchen with a knife.
So my other horror movie was What If Clue was just like every possible permutation of murder in one house at the same time. Battle Royale Clue. It's not one plot. It's not multiple plots. It's all the potential permutations.
Like a Victorian battle royale would actually be kind of interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And my last one is Cards Against Humanity. Mm-hmm. But what if it was like, actually very like Ouija? So you've got Cards Against Humanity, and the people who are playing it don't realize that it's actually like a divination deck that is writing reality as the game is being played. So all these absurdist hipster turns of phrase matched with pop cultural references and such, they're all manifesting as the game is being played.
So it's like a douchey version of the I Ching.
Yes.
Yeah.
But ultra cosmic horror at the same time because anything is possible.
Yeah. If you could contact anybody with a Ouija board, and they have to be dead because you can't talk to the living, who would you contact and what would you ask them?
I don't know. I don't have any unresolved issues with anybody who's dead. And I think the implication with something like, what if a Ouija board was real? What would you ask it? Is, first of all, you'd have to trust the source. And if you can't trust the source, you have to worry if the spirit is lying. And then you sort of have to get into binary game theory to try and force the hand of the spirit to give you what you want. Right? I don't know that a spirit would have any information that would make. We're going back to like the lottery. Like, do you ask it lottery numbers? Like, does it know the future? Does it know how to cure AIDS?
It would have it would solely have the knowledge of the person who died.
I don't know. I don't have the answer now. But if this was actually going to happen, I would go and do a bunch of research and try to find an example of a DB Cooper.
Right. Where is the treasure?
Where's the treasure buried?
Yeah.
That's the only thing I can really think of is how to get rich, but not too much money.
Yeah.
What about you?
Probably similar. I'd probably like try to figure out which Nazi hid all the Jewish gold and see where they put it.
So you could liberate it back to the chosen people.
I mean, some of it, yeah.
Finder's fee.
Yeah. But I think like being of the chosen people myself, I think that I get to keep a good portion of it.
Yeah, probably most.
At least 10%. I mean, standard, right? Like that's like if I was a Jewish agent in Hollywood, that's what I would charge.
What do real estate agents charge?
I do not know.
Use that as a median.
Yeah. Or pirate, Blackbeard, for instance. Like, where did you hide your pirate
One-eyed
treasure?
Willie.
Yeah, that sort of thing would be pretty cool. Alternately, just stuff I've always wanted to know, like Kennedy assassination stuff would be kind of interesting.
Sure.
Yeah.
I guess there's also like, what did happen to Hitler? Like, can you just communicate any specific person? Like, what actually happened to Amelia Earhart?
Yeah.
Just sort of wrap up some open-ended history questions.
Yeah, it'd probably be pretty good. But I wonder what the most profitable history question to answer would be. Like, which history mystery would put the most money in your pocket?
It's probably it's gold.
I mean, the one that would probably have the most disruptive potential for the world would be, was Jesus a real person? You know what I mean? Ooh. Like, if that was like definitely yes, definitely no, it would radically change. I mean, maybe if you knew it, it wouldn't change anything. But if that was a question that you could present to the world, a definitive answer, that would probably change the world more than anything else.
Well, I think a Ouija board actually being real to begin with would disrupt already.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing about it, too, is if you had a really functioning Ouija board, I mean, at least $1,000 an hour to let people use it.
That's probably true, yeah. But then are you unlocking secrets that make the world a worse place because you're not in control? Because then it becomes you're a superhero for hire. It's one thing if you're in control of your superpowers, but if you're renting them out, are you actually potentially making the world a worse place by letting other people have access to hidden knowledge that is perhaps best kept buried?
But doesn't information want to be free? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Who knows? Definitely would not want to develop an app. Is there a Ouija board app? That would be terrible.
I'm sure there is.
Yeah, there must be, right? Gross.
And on that note,
yeah,
we'll see you next time for Scary Thoughts Facebook.
Yes, the thing that actually knows all the answers to your secrets.
Better than you do.
Yes.
Thanks for listening.
All right. Fucking Yahtzee.